Montana Territory, 1879. Dust swirled across the main street of Copper Creek as the stagecoach rolled to a stop, its wooden wheels creaking against the parched earth. The small mining town had sprung up like a stubborn weed in the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains, clinging to existence through harsh winters and unforgiving summers. Finn Fairchild stood outside the general store, one boot propped against the hitching post, watching with mild interest. At 25, he'd already seen enough drifters and fortune-seekers to know that newcomers meant little to a man who preferred the company of cattle to people. Nothing worth hanging around for, he muttered to himself, adjusting his worn Stetson against the glare of the afternoon sun. His 6 years working the Rockingham Ranch had taught him one immutable truth. Attachment was a fool's gamble on the frontier. His parents' graves on the lonely Kansas prairie stood testament to that hard lesson. The frontier took more than it gave, and love was a luxury that cowboys like him couldn't afford. The young foreman's weathered face belied his years, though the golden stubble on his strong jaw and the clear blue of his eyes hinted at the boyish spirit that once existed before the harsh realities of ranch life had hardened him. Tall and broad-shouldered from years of breaking horses and driving cattle, Finn had earned respect among the other hands not just for his skill with a lasso, but for his steadfast reliability. He was the man who rode out in blizzards to rescue stranded calves, who worked from dawn until the stars emerged without complaint. What he wanted was simple: to save enough to buy a small spread of his own someday, a place where he answered to no one. But what he truly needed, the connection that would fill the hollow space that expanded in his chest with each passing season, remained unacknowledged, buried beneath layers of hard-won self-reliance. The stagecoach door swung open, and Finn was about to turn away when a gloved hand emerged, followed by the most striking woman he had ever seen. She was young, perhaps 20, with honey-blonde hair peeking out from beneath a fashionable blue bonnet that matched her traveling dress. Her face, delicate and determined, surveyed the dusty street with an appraising gaze that suggested she was neither intimidated nor impressed by her surroundings. Something about her posture, straight-backed and resolute, held Finn in place. She stepped down without waiting for assistance, though the driver hurried to offer his hand belatedly. When she smiled her thanks, the warmth of it seemed to reach across the street and wrap around Finn like a physical force. "Need a hand with those bags, miss?" he called out before he could stop himself, pushing away from the hitching post. "That would be most kind," she replied, her voice carrying a soft eastern lilt that stood out against the rough cadences of the mining town. As Finn approached, he noticed the quality of her clothing, expensive but practical, and the intelligent assessment in her green eyes. Not some banker's pampered daughter, then, but someone with purpose. "Beatrice Murphy," she said, extending her hand as if they were meeting in a Philadelphia parlor rather than a dusty Montana street. "I've come to take over the schoolhouse." Finn's hand enveloped hers, calloused palm against soft kid leather. "Finn Fairchild, Rockingham Ranch." The words came out gruffer than he'd intended, as something unexpected fluttered in his chest. Recognition, perhaps, that this woman represented everything the frontier had taught him to avoid: complication, distraction, vulnerability. "The schoolhouse hasn't seen a teacher in nearly a year," he added, lifting her trunk with ease. Most folks figured the town council had given up finding someone willing to come all this way. "I'm not most teachers, Mr. Fairchild," Beatrice replied, a spark of challenge in her eyes. "And I've never been one to shy away from a journey." As they walked toward the boarding house, Finn felt the stares of townsfolk, heard the whispers that followed them. School teachers didn't last in Copper Creek. The isolation, the hardship, the rough-hewn children of miners and ranchers all conspired to send them back east within months. "You should know," he said quietly. "This town's not kind to dreamers or reformers. Whatever brought you here, Miss Murphy, a position was advertised, and I accepted it," she interrupted, her chin lifting slightly. Nothing more mysterious than that. But Finn had spent too many years reading the subtle shifts of cattle before a storm, the body language of horses about to bolt. Beatrice Murphy carried secrets as surely as she carried the leather-bound book tucked under her arm. "Well, I hope you find what you're looking for," he said as they reached the boarding house steps. He set down her trunk, tipped his hat, and turned to go. "Mr. Fairchild," she called after him, making him pause. I understand there are several children at the outlying ranches who haven't had proper schooling. Would the Rockingham be among them? The question struck like an arrow finding its mark. The ranch owner's 3 young children, motherless since the previous winter, with no education save what their father could provide in spare moments. The Rockingham has its share, Finn acknowledged, unexpectedly unsettled by her perception. But it's 15 miles out, and mountain winters don't much care for schedules. Then perhaps I'll need to make arrangements to reach them, she said simply, as if the challenge of Montana's brutal geography was merely a puzzle to be solved rather than an immovable obstacle. Finn found himself smiling despite his reservations. You really aren't like the others, are you? No, Mr. Fairchild, she replied, a hint of mystery in her smile. I'm not. As he walked away, Finn couldn't shake the certainty that Beatrice Murphy would upset the careful balance of his ordered existence. He had survived by keeping the world at arm's length, by expecting nothing and therefore losing nothing. But something in those clear green eyes had recognized something in him, something he thought he'd buried deep enough that no one would ever find it. 2 weeks later, Finn guided his horse along the muddy track leading back to the Rockingham, cursing the spring thaw that turned solid ground treacherous. The ranch owner, Maxwell Jenkins, had sent him to town for supplies and mail, routine tasks that Finn now approached with an unfamiliar tension coiled in his stomach. Each trip to Copper Creek meant the possibility of encountering Beatrice Murphy, an eventuality he both anticipated and dreaded. She had wasted no time making her presence known in the town. The schoolhouse windows gleamed with fresh washing, curtains appeared where there had been none, and the sound of children reciting lessons drifted into the street. Most surprising of all, attendance had nearly doubled as word spread that the new teacher taught not just reading and figures, but music, natural sciences, and even rudimentary French. Fairchild, Maxwell Jenkins' voice boomed across the yard as Finn dismounted. The ranch owner strode toward him, his weathered face creased with worry. Any word on that cattle buyer from Helena? Wire came in. He's delayed another week, Finn replied, handing over the stack of mail. Spring floods took out a bridge north of 3 Forks. Jenkins cursed, running a hand through his graying hair. We can't hold these beeves forever. Feed's running low as it is. We'll manage, Finn assured him, though the concern was legitimate. The Rockingham was land-rich but cash-poor, and the sale of this season's cattle meant the difference between stability and ruin. As they walked toward the main house, Jenkins shuffled through the mail, pausing at an official-looking envelope. What's this? From the school board? Finn stiffened. New teachers making changes. Mentioned something about reaching children on outlying ranches. Humph. Likely just another do-gooder who'll be gone by first snow, Jenkins muttered, breaking the seal. His eyes scanned the letter, widening in surprise. Well, I'll be damned. She's proposing to ride out 3 days a week to teach Emma, Sarah, and little Thomas, if we'll provide her accommodation those nights. The idea of Beatrice Murphy at the Rockingham, seated at their dinner table, perhaps lingering in the evening to read stories to the children, sent an unexpected warmth through Finn's chest, immediately followed by alarm. The ranch was his sanctuary, the one place where his role was clear and uncomplicated. That's 15 miles of rough country, and she'd be riding alone, Finn protested. It's not safe. Jenkins eyed him curiously. She suggests that perhaps someone might escort her, at least until she learns the way. He folded the letter, tucking it into his vest pocket. Says she'd start next Monday, weather permitting. You're not actually considering this? Finn asked, dismay evident in his voice. My children haven't had proper schooling since their mother passed, Jenkins said quietly. If this woman's willing to brave the journey, who am I to refuse? His expression softened. Besides, Emma asked just yesterday when she might learn to read like the town children. How do I look my daughter in the eye and tell her that her future matters less because she was born on a ranch? Guilt twisted in Finn's gut. The Jenkins children were bright, curious little things who deserved more than their isolated existence offered. But the thought of Beatrice disrupting the careful boundaries he'd built around his heart left him cold with apprehension. I'll escort her myself, Jenkins decided. Can't spare you from the south pasture fence mending anyway. Relief mingled with an inexplicable disappointment as Finn nodded. As you say, boss. That night, as he lay in his bunk in the ranch hand's quarters, Finn found himself staring at the rough-hewn ceiling, sleep eluding him. The image of Beatrice Murphy sitting astride a horse, navigating the... As they stopped to rest the horses at midday, sharing the lunch Mrs. Jenkins had packed, Finn found himself watching Beatrice's hands as she neatly sliced an apple. They were a teacher's hands, ink-stained fingertips, a small callus on her middle finger from holding a pen, but they moved with a grace that suggested refinement. "You didn't answer my question earlier," she said suddenly. "About the children at the Rockingham. What are they like?" Finn's face softened as he thought of the Jenkins children. "Emma's the oldest, 9, going on 30. Takes care of her siblings like a little mother since Mrs. Jenkins passed. Smart as a whip, always asking questions about everything. Sarah's 7, shy but observant, notices things others miss. And Thomas is just 5, full of energy and crazy about horses." "They sound wonderful," Beatrice said, her smile genuine. "And they've had no schooling at all. Mrs. Jenkins taught them their letters before she took sick, and the boss reads to them when he can. But," Finn shrugged, "ranch life doesn't leave much time for book learning. Every child deserves an education, Mr. Fairchild, regardless of where they live," she said with quiet passion. "Knowledge is the one thing that can never be taken from you, the one true freedom." Something in her words stirred a long-dormant regret in Finn's chest. His own schooling had ended at 12 when his parents died, leaving him to make his way as a ranch hand. He'd learned to read and cipher well enough, but there had been dreams once, of seeing the places in his geography book, of understanding the mysterious symbols in algebra texts. "You believe that," he said, not a question but a recognition. "You really think books can change these children's lives?" "I know they can," she replied, holding his gaze steadily. "The same way they changed mine." They remounted and continued their journey, the conversation shifting to more neutral topics. The names of wildflowers Beatrice didn't recognize, the history of the Rockingham, the challenges of Montana winters. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge that offered the first view of the ranch, a cluster of buildings nestled in a protected valley, smoke rising from the main house chimney, cattle dotting the distant pastures. "Home," Finn said without thinking, then quickly corrected himself. "The Rockingham, I mean." Beatrice gave him a sidelong glance, but didn't comment on his slip. As they descended toward the ranch, 3 small figures burst from the main house, racing across the yard to meet them. "They're here. The teacher's here." Emma's voice carried on the wind as she herded her younger siblings ahead of her, all 3 dressed in their Sunday best despite the ordinary Monday. Finn dismounted first, then helped Beatrice down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. The touch seemed to startle them both, a current of awareness passing between them before they quickly stepped apart. "Miss Murphy, these are the Jenkins children, Emma, Sarah, and Thomas," Finn introduced, his voice gruffer than he intended. Beatrice knelt to their level, smiling warmly. "I'm very pleased to meet you all. I've brought some books I think you might enjoy, and slates for writing your lessons. Can you teach me to read about knights and dragons?" Thomas asked, eyes wide with hope. "And multiplication tables?" Emma added seriously. "Poetry," Sarah whispered, almost too softly to hear. "All of that and more," Beatrice promised, rising to her feet as Maxwell Jenkins approached. "Welcome to the Rockingham, Miss Murphy," the rancher said, extending his hand. "We're mighty grateful you're willing to make this journey for our young-uns." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Jenkins," she replied. "You have a beautiful home and delightful children." As they walked toward the house, Finn found himself hanging back, suddenly aware of his place, or lack thereof, in this tableau. He was the foreman, not family, and his duty to escort the teacher was complete. "Mr. Fairchild," Beatrice called, turning back. "Won't you join us for dinner? The children are eager to show me their favorite books, but I'm sure they'd like to have you there too." "Please, Finn," Thomas begged, racing back to grab his hand. "You promised to help me with my wood carving tonight." Caught between his instinct to maintain distance and the genuine warmth in their invitations, Finn hesitated before nodding. "Let me tend to the horses first. I'll be along shortly." As he led the animals to the stable, Finn fought against the uncomfortable realization that Beatrice Murphy had already begun to dismantle the careful walls he'd built around his life at the Rockingham. Worse still, he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to rebuild them. Over the next month, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays took on a new rhythm for the Rockingham. Finn would ride at dawn to Copper Creek, returning with Beatrice by mid-morning. She would spend the day teaching the Jenkins children in the converted sunroom of the main house, then join the family for dinner before retiring to the small guest room that had become the teacher's room. On the second night of her first visit, a spring thunderstorm had made the return journey to town impossible, establishing the pattern of her overnight stays. Now, as May turned to June, these days had become the beating heart of ranch life. Even the Cowboys adjusted their schedules to be near the main house when lessons ended, eager to hear the children's excited accounts of what they'd learned. Finn tried to maintain his distance, focusing on ranch work and joining the evening meals only when specifically invited. But he found himself listening outside open windows as Beatrice read aloud, or pausing in his chores to watch her lead the children on nature walks, identifying plants and insects with the same enthusiasm she brought to multiplication tables. One Wednesday afternoon, he was repairing a bridle in the stable when Sarah slipped in, clutching a slate. "Finn," she whispered, her shy voice barely audible over the sounds of horses shifting in their stalls. "Can you help me with my penmanship? Miss Murphy says I need to practice, but Emma's busy helping Thomas." He set aside his work, wiping his hands clean before accepting the slate. Sarah had carefully copied a short poem, her letters wobbly but legible. "This looks mighty fine already, Miss Sarah," he said, studying her work. "What's troubling you about it?" "Miss Murphy makes her letters so pretty, and mine are all crooked," she sighed, tracing a finger along her uneven script. "Well, now, let's see." Finn picked up the chalk and demonstrated how to form each letter more consistently. "My old teacher used to say it's like training a horse. You've got to do the same motion over and over until your hand remembers it without thinking." Sarah nodded solemnly, taking back the slate and carefully copying his example. They worked together quietly until a shadow fell across the stable door. "So this is where my missing student disappeared to," Beatrice said, her voice warm with amusement. She wore a simple calico dress today, her honey blonde hair coming loose from its pins after a long day of teaching. "Finn's helping me with my letters," Sarah explained, holding up her slate proudly. "See how much better they are?" Beatrice stepped closer, examining the neat row of improved penmanship. Her shoulder brushed against Finn's as she leaned in, the faint scent of lavender water momentarily clouding his thoughts. "Mr. Fairchild appears to have a natural talent for teaching," she observed, her green eyes meeting his with genuine appreciation. "Perhaps you missed your calling, sir." "Just sharing what I remember from school," he demurred, suddenly self-conscious about his rough hands and work-stained clothes beside her tidy appearance. "Knowledge passed along is never just anything," Beatrice replied. "Sarah, why don't you go show your father your improved writing? I'm sure he'd be proud to see it." When the girl had skipped away, Beatrice turned to Finn with a more serious expression. "I've been meaning to thank you for these past weeks. The journey would be much more difficult without your escort." "Just doing what needs doing," he said, returning to his bridal repair to hide the pleasure her thanks evoked. Beatrice watched him work for a moment, then said quietly, "You know, Mr. Fairchild, you're not at all what I expected when I first arrived in Copper Creek." "And what did you expect?" he asked, glancing up. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted with a small smile. "Someone less complex, perhaps." The word hung between them, laden with unspoken observations. Finn felt exposed, as if she could see past the competent cowboy to the uncertain man beneath, the orphan who'd taught himself to survive by keeping others at arm's length. "Not much complexity to a cowboy's life, Miss Murphy," he said, deliberately focusing on the bridle. "Work the cattle, mend what breaks, repeat until winter. Is that why you read Shakespeare when you think no one's watching?" His hand stilled. The small volume of collected works had been his mother's, one of the few possessions he'd kept after her death. He sometimes read it by lamplight in the stable during evening checks, finding strange comfort in the ancient words. "Saw that, did you?" he asked, neither confirming nor denying. "Last Friday, when you thought I was helping Emma with her geography." Beatrice leaned against a post, studying him. "You seemed particularly engrossed in Macbeth." "Just passing time," he said dismissively, though they both knew it for the lie it was. "There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face," she quoted softly. Duncan's observation about the traitor he failed to recognize. It struck me as fitting. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with recognition. "Fitting how exactly?" Finn asked, his voice low. "We all wear masks," Mr. Fairchild, she said simply. Some of us more convincingly than others. Before he could respond, the decision cast a shadow over the meal, everyone aware of the risks involved in both the drive itself and in leaving the ranch vulnerable with reduced manpower. After dinner, Finn found Beatrice on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. I suppose this means our teaching arrangement will be interrupted, she said as he joined her at the railing. Afraid so. I'll be leading the drive to Helena, and we can't spare anyone to escort you from town. Finn hesitated, then added, might be for the best anyway. Cattle thieves get bold when they know ranches are short-handed. Beatrice turned to face him, concern evident in her expression. Is there real danger then? Always is, he replied honestly. But more so now. The drought's got everyone desperate, and word travels fast when a ranch plans a drive. The children will be disappointed, she said, her gaze returning to the darkening landscape. We were making such progress. They'll manage, Finn assured her, though he knew it was poor comfort. The Jenkins children had blossomed under her tutelage, their natural intelligence finding fertile ground in her patient instruction. When do you leave? She asked after a moment. Day after tomorrow. Early. Beatrice nodded, seeming to come to a decision. Then I'll stay until you return. Stay, Finn repeated, startled by the suggestion. Here, at the ranch, she clarified. With the children. It makes perfect sense. They won't miss their lessons, and I'll be one less thing for Mr. Jenkins to worry about while you're gone. Alarm bells rang in Finn's mind. Miss Murphy, it's not proper. Mrs. Jenkins' sister arrives tomorrow to help with the household, Beatrice interrupted, clearly having anticipated his objection. And propriety seems a small concern compared to the children's education. Unless, she added with sudden uncertainty, you think I would be in the way? The idea of Beatrice remaining at the Rockingham during his absence filled Finn with conflicting emotions. On one hand, her presence would boost morale for those left behind, and the children would certainly benefit. On the other, the thought of her potentially facing danger without him there to protect her made his blood run cold. It's not my decision to make, he said finally. You'll need to speak with Jenkins. I already have, she replied with a hint of triumph. He thought it a sensible arrangement, especially since I offered to help with household duties as well as teaching. Of course she had. In the months since her arrival, Beatrice had revealed herself to be not just educated but practical and determined, always 3 steps ahead in her planning. Then I guess it's settled, Finn said, trying to mask his unease. But promise me you'll stay close to the main house. No wandering off exploring like you did last week. Her lips curved in a small smile. Are you concerned for my welfare, Mr. Fairchild? I'm concerned for anyone under my protection, he replied stiffly. Under your protection, she repeated softly, studying his face in the fading light. Is that how you see me? The question hung between them, layered with meaning Finn wasn't ready to examine. Before he could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much, Jenkins called from inside, asking for Finn's help with the drive preparations. Excuse me, he said, grateful for the interruption. As he turned to go, Beatrice reached out, her fingers lightly touching his arm. Be careful in Helena, she said, her voice carrying a warmth that wrapped around him like a physical embrace. The children would be terribly disappointed if anything happened to their favorite cowboy. Just the children? He asked before he could stop himself. In the gathering twilight, her expression was difficult to read, but her voice was steady when she answered. No, Mr. Fairchild. Not just the children. The cattle drive preparations consumed the next day, leaving Finn little time to dwell on his conversation with Beatrice. By dawn on the day of departure, the selected herd was ready to move, and 4 cowboys prepared to guide them on the long journey to Helena. As Finn mounted his horse, he was surprised to see Beatrice emerge from the main house, a small package in her hands. She crossed to him quickly, her hair loose around her shoulders in the early morning light. A small token for your journey, she said, handing up the carefully wrapped parcel. Nothing fancy, just some dried apple pieces and ginger snaps. The simple gift touched him more deeply than any expensive token could have. Thank you, he said, tucking it carefully into his saddlebag. I'll think of you, of the ranch, when I enjoy them. Godspeed, Mr. Fairchild, she replied, stepping back as he gathered his reins. As the riders moved out with their bellowing charges, Finn glanced back once to see Beatrice standing in the yard, her slender figure silhouetted against the rising sun. Something about the image, her stillness amidst the bustling ranch activity, her solitary form watching their departure, struck him with unexpected force. For the first time, he allowed himself to acknowledge what he'd been fighting for months. Beatrice Murphy had become more than just the schoolteacher, more than a temporary visitor to the Rocking M. She had, somehow, become essential. The revelation was both exhilarating and terrifying. Finn had built his life around self-sufficiency, around needing no one and therefore risking no loss. But as the miles stretched between them, he found himself counting the days until he could return, not just to the ranch, but to her. The cattle drive to Helena proved more difficult than anticipated. Summer thunderstorms swelled creeks to dangerous levels, forcing detours that added days to their journey. By the time they finally reached the stockyards and concluded their business, nearly 2 weeks had passed instead of the expected 10 days. The return journey brought its own challenges. A broken wagon wheel, a snake-spooked horse that threw its rider, ominous tracks suggesting they were being followed by men with questionable intentions. Finn pushed the crew hard, concern for the ranch growing with each passing day. The money from the cattle sale, a considerable sum that would see the Rocking M through the lean months ahead, weighed heavy in his saddlebags, increasing his vigilance. When they finally crested the ridge overlooking the ranch on a sweltering late July afternoon, Finn's relief quickly turned to alarm. Smoke rose from the direction of the south pasture, and even from this distance, he could see unusual activity in the ranch yard. Horses gathered, men moving with purpose. "Something's wrong," he muttered, spurring his mount forward. The others followed, abandoning their measured pace for a headlong gallop toward the ranch. As they thundered into the yard, Maxwell Jenkins emerged from the barn, his face grim but relieved at their appearance. "Thank God you're back," he called. "Cattle rustlers hit last night, drove off 30 head from the south pasture. We've got a posse forming to go after them." Finn dismounted, scanning the gathered men. "Anyone hurt?" "Pete took a bullet in the shoulder when he tried to stop them, but Doc says he'll mend," Jenkins replied, accepting the money pouch Finn handed him with barely a glance. They were bold, came right up to the edge of the ranch buildings. If young Thomas hadn't been unable to sleep and spotted them from his window, a cold dread settled in Finn's stomach. "The children? Miss Murphy? They're all right." "Shaken but unharmed," Jenkins assured him. Miss Murphy was remarkable, got the children to safety in the root cellar, then helped tend to Pete's wound before the doctor arrived. He lowered his voice. "Between us, I think she saved his life. Knew exactly how to slow the bleeding until help came." Relief washed through Finn, followed immediately by a burning need to see Beatrice for himself. "Where is she now?" "Inside with the children. Been keeping them occupied with lessons to distract from all this commotion." Jenkins gestured toward the house, then turned to organize the gathering posse. Finn hesitated only briefly before heading toward the main house, duty warring with personal desire. He should join the posse. His tracking skills would be valuable in pursuing the rustlers. But the need to assure himself of Beatrice's safety pulled stronger. He found them in the sunroom that served as their classroom, Beatrice sitting calmly at the table while the children worked on their slates. She looked up as he entered, her composed expression momentarily fracturing to reveal profound relief before she recovered her teacher's demeanor. "Children, look who's returned," she announced, rising from her chair. Thomas abandoned all pretense of lessons, launching himself at Finn with a whoop of delight. "Finn, did you hear? I saw the bad men and raised the alarm. Papa says I'm a hero." "That you are, partner," Finn agreed, ruffling the boy's hair while his eyes remained fixed on Beatrice. She appeared outwardly unruffled, but he noticed the faint shadows beneath her eyes suggesting sleepless nights, the tension in her shoulders despite her calm facade. "Ladies," he acknowledged Emma and Sarah with a tip of his hat. "You've all been brave, I hear." Miss Murphy was the bravest, Emma declared with the certainty of her 9 years. She wasn't scared at all when the shooting started. "I'm sure Miss Murphy was as concerned as any sensible person would be," Finn corrected gently, watching color rise in Beatrice's cheeks at the praise. "Perhaps you children might like to see the horses your father has gathered for the posse," Beatrice suggested, clearly seeking a moment of privacy. "You can watch from the front porch. No closer, mind you. When the children had scampered out, Finn closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. "Are you truly all right?" he asked, his voice. Just then, Jenkins appeared in the doorway. "Fairchild, we're ready to ride. Need you to take point on the tracking." Duty called, clear and insistent. Finn nodded, turning back to Beatrice one last time. "Stay close to the house. Keep the doors locked at night." "Be careful," she replied, echoing her words from 2 weeks earlier, but with a new urgency that stirred something profound in his chest. As he joined the posse gathering in the yard, Finn felt torn in a way he'd never experienced before. The trail ahead demanded his full attention, yet he found himself looking back at the house where Beatrice stood watching from the window, her palm pressed against the glass in silent farewell. For the first time in his adult life, Finn Fairchild realized he had someone, he desperately wanted to return to. The recognition should have terrified him, this newfound vulnerability after years of careful isolation. Instead, it filled him with a fierce determination to eliminate the threat to the ranch, to her, and return as swiftly as possible. The posse tracked the rustlers for 3 days, following their trail into the rugged hills that bordered the next county. When they finally caught up to the thieves, a desperate band led by a former ranch hand with a grudge against successful operations like the Rocking M, the confrontation was brief but violent. 2 rustlers died in the exchange of gunfire, another was wounded and captured, and the rest scattered into the wilderness, abandoning the stolen cattle. Finn took a bullet that grazed his upper arm, painful but not serious. By the time they drove the recovered cattle back to the Rocking M, the wound had been roughly bandaged by one of the cowboys, but infection had set in, bringing fever and weakness that he stubbornly fought to conceal. As they rode into the ranch yard at dusk on the 4th day, Finn swayed slightly in the saddle, his vision blurring at the edges. He dismounted with careful dignity, determined not to show weakness in front of the gathered ranch hands and family members who came out to welcome them home. Jenkins was explaining their success to the assembled crowd when Beatrice pushed through, her eyes finding Finn immediately. She crossed to him with quick, purposeful strides, her gaze sharp as it catalogued his pallor, the awkward way he held his arm, the sheen of sweat on his brow despite the cooling evening air. "You're injured," she stated flatly, no question in her voice. "It's nothing," Finn dismissed, though the effort of standing upright was becoming increasingly difficult. "Just a scratch." Beatrice's expression hardened. "A scratch doesn't cause fever, Mr. Fairchild. How long has it been infected?" Her directness left no room for evasion. "Since yesterday, maybe. It's under control." Without warning, she reached for his good arm, her grip surprisingly strong as she began steering him toward the main house. "Mr. Jenkins," she called over her shoulder, "please have someone bring hot water and clean linens to the kitchen. Mr. Fairchild requires immediate medical attention." Too weak to resist, and secretly relieved at her intervention, Finn allowed himself to be led away from the curious onlookers. Inside the house, Beatrice guided him to a kitchen chair and immediately began cutting away his sleeve to expose the wound. "This is far from nothing," she scolded, her gentle hands belying her stern tone as she examined the angry red streaks spreading from the inflamed gash. "You're fortunate it hasn't progressed further. Didn't want to slow the return journey," he explained, wincing as she began cleaning the wound with a solution that stung fiercely. "Always the protector, never considering your own welfare," Beatrice muttered, working methodically. "Did it never occur to you that others might care whether you live or die, Mr. Fairchild?" The raw emotion in her voice penetrated even his fever-muddled thoughts. "Do you?" he asked, searching her face. "Care." Her hands stilled momentarily, then resumed their work with renewed focus. "I would have thought that obvious by now," she said quietly. Before Finn could respond, Mrs. Jenkins and her sister arrived with the requested supplies, effectively ending any private conversation. He submitted to Beatrice's ministrations in silence, watching her work with the confident efficiency of someone with genuine medical training. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked when the wound had been thoroughly cleaned, treated with a poultice, and neatly bandaged. "I told you my father was a doctor," she replied, washing her hands in a basin. "I assisted him from the time I was 12. He believed women were just as capable of learning medicine as men, though few had the opportunity." "He sounds like an unusual man." "He was," she agreed, a shadow crossing her face. Brilliant, compassionate, forward-thinking, and eventually heartbroken. After my mother died, she trailed off, busying herself with organizing the medical supplies. He what? Finn prompted gently. Beatrice met his gaze directly, seeming to make a decision. He took to drinking, gradually at first, then consuming enough that his practice began to suffer. By the time I was 18, he could barely function without a bottle nearby. The admission clearly cost her, the pain still fresh in her eyes despite her composed delivery. Finn reached for her hand with his good arm, offering silent support. "Is that why you came west?" he asked. "To escape the situation?" "In part," she acknowledged, her fingers tightening briefly around his before withdrawing. "But there's more to it than that. Another time, perhaps. Right now, you need rest to fight this infection." Despite his burning curiosity, Finn recognized she was right. Exhaustion pulled at him, the fever making his thoughts increasingly disjointed. He allowed himself to be helped to the small room off the kitchen that occasionally served as a sick room for ranch hands, too ill to return to the bunkhouse, but not requiring a trip to town for the doctor. As Beatrice helped him settle onto the narrow bed, her cool hand briefly touched his forehead in a gesture that seemed more tender than clinical. "Sleep now," she instructed softly. "I'll check on you throughout the night." "You don't need to," he began to protest. "I know I don't need to," she interrupted with a small smile. "I want to. That's rather the point, isn't it, Mr. Fairchild?" As she turned to go, Finn caught her wrist gently. "Finn," he said, his voice rough with fever and emotion. "After everything, I think you might call me Finn." Her smile deepened, reaching her eyes with a warmth that seemed to ease his discomfort. "Finn," she repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Rest well." Through the fever dreams that followed, disjointed images of cattle stampedes and gunfights, Finn was aware of Beatrice's presence at intervals, her cool hands on his brow, her gentle voice encouraging him to drink water or broth. Once, he thought he felt the whisper of lips against his temple, but couldn't be certain if it was reality or the fever's fantasy. By morning, the fever had broken. Finn woke to find sunlight streaming through the small window and Beatrice asleep in a chair beside his bed, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, a book open in her lap. The sight struck him with unexpected force. This educated, refined woman who had crossed a continent to teach frontier children had spent the night watching over a wounded cowboy with the same dedication she brought to everything. As if sensing his gaze, Beatrice stirred, her eyes opening to find him watching her. A smile of genuine relief lit her face as she noted his improved color. "The fever's broken," she observed, reaching to check his forehead with the back of her hand. "How do you feel?" "Like I was trampled by the entire herd," Finn admitted with a weak laugh. "But clearer. Better. Good." She stretched discreetly, wincing at the stiffness in her neck from the awkward sleeping position. "You had me worried for a while there." "Did I say anything unusual during the fever?" he asked, suddenly concerned about what might have escaped his lips when his defenses were down. A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Nothing coherent," she assured him, though something in her expression suggested she wasn't being entirely forthcoming. Before he could press the issue, Emma appeared in the doorway with a tray of breakfast. "Miss Murphy, Finn's awake," she exclaimed, her delight evident. "Does this mean he's going to be all right?" "It does indeed," Beatrice confirmed, rising from her chair. "Your patient is recovering nicely, Nurse Emma." The girl beamed at the title, carefully setting the tray on the small table beside the bed. "I brought you coffee and biscuits," she told Finn importantly. "And Sarah's making you a get-well card. But it's a surprise, so don't tell her I said anything." As Emma chattered about the ranch happenings he'd missed, Finn found his gaze drawn repeatedly to Beatrice, who was quietly straightening the room. Despite her evident fatigue after the night's vigil, she moved with a grace that spoke of inner strength rather than fragility. The more he learned about her, the more complex she revealed herself to be. Schoolteacher, healer, survivor of unnamed troubles that had driven her west. When Emma finally left to report his improvement to the rest of the family, Beatrice approached the bed once more. "You should be able to return to your own quarters tomorrow if the improvement continues," she said. "But no strenuous activity for at least a week. That arm needs time to heal properly." "Yes, ma'am," Finn replied with exaggerated deference, earning a small smile. "I mean it," she insisted, her expression growing serious. You came very close to a dangerous infection. Had we been farther from medical help? I know, he acknowledged, sobering. Thank you. Not just for last night, but for everything since the... Finn's hands tightened on the arms of his chair, his knuckles white with the effort of restraining his outrage. How did you get away? Father died last winter. Pneumonia, though the drinking had weakened his heart considerably. With him gone, there was nothing to temper Francis's behavior. He had already arranged a marriage for me to a business associate twice my age, a man cut from the same cloth as my brother. A bitter smile touched her lips. I sold my mother's jewelry, took what money I could find in Father's study, and left Philadelphia the night before the wedding was to take place. The advertisement for a teacher in Montana Territory seemed like divine providence, far enough that Francis wouldn't easily follow. The pieces fell into place for Finn, her competent medical knowledge, her occasional wariness, the way she sometimes flinched at sudden movements. Do you think he's looking for you? I have no doubt, she replied grimly. Francis doesn't tolerate what he sees as defiance, and my departure cost him both a valuable alliance through marriage and his household manager. He will search, but Philadelphia is a long way from Montana, and I was careful to cover my tracks. The thought of Beatrice's brother pursuing her filled Finn with protective fury, but he kept his voice measured. No one at the Rockingham would let anyone harm you, he assured her. Nor in Copper Creek, for that matter. You've become important to folks around here. She turned to him then, her expression softening. Have I become important to you, Finn? The directness of the question caught him off guard, though he realized he should have expected nothing less from her. In the golden light of sunset, with her honey-blonde hair loosened from its daytime pins and her green eyes holding his steadily, Beatrice looked both vulnerable and strong. A woman who had fled across a continent rather than submit to tyranny, who had built a new life through sheer determination. Yes, he admitted finally, the simple truth feeling momentous as it left his lips. More important than I thought anyone could be. Something shifted in her expression, relief, perhaps, or triumph. I've been waiting months for you to acknowledge that, she said softly. I've been fighting it for just as long, he confessed. My whole life has been about not needing anyone, not risking loss again after my parents died. And now, she prompted. Now I find myself thinking that some risks might be worth taking, he said, meeting her gaze directly. That building walls against loss means building walls against everything that makes life worth living. Beatrice rose from her chair and moved to stand before him, her nearness sending his heart racing. That sounds remarkably like a philosophy I could share, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, Finn reached for her hand. When her fingers twined with his without hesitation, he drew her closer until she settled naturally onto the arm of his chair, her skirts brushing against his leg. I'm not a wealthy man, he said quietly. I have savings, plans for a small spread of my own someday, but nothing like the life you knew in Philadelphia. The life I knew in Philadelphia came with golden chains, she replied, her free hand tentatively touching his cheek. I would rather have freedom and honest work than luxury built on cruelty and control. The touch of her fingers against his skin ignited something that had been smoldering for months. With deliberate care, Finn raised his hand to cup her face, his thumb tracing the delicate curve of her cheekbone. May I kiss you, Beatrice Murphy? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Her answer came not in words, but in action as she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. The first touch of her lips against his was tentative, questioning, but as his arm slipped around her waist to draw her closer, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing finally acknowledged. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Finn rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since you stepped off that stagecoach, he admitted. Even though you were determined to keep your distance, she teased gently. Especially then, he confessed. I knew you would complicate everything I thought I had figured out about my life. And have I? She asked, her fingers now tracing the line of his jaw with wondering exploration. Completely, he assured her, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. And I wouldn't have it any other way. The weeks that followed held a new sweetness for Finn and Beatrice as their relationship deepened from cautious courtship to something more profound. Their time together remained largely confined to the 3 days she stayed at the ranch each week, though Finn now rode to town more frequently on various errands, that inevitably included visits to the schoolhouse. September brought cooler temperatures, the first hints of autumn touching the cottonwoods with gold along the creek. Beatrice's teaching expanded to include adult classes 3 evenings a week in town, attended by miners, shop girls, and ranch hands eager to improve their reading and mathematics skills. On a crisp Saturday morning, Finn rode into Copper Creek to find unusual activity centered around the stage office. A crowd had gathered, voices raised in excitement or concern, and the sheriff stood on the boardwalk speaking with the stagecoach driver who had just arrived from Helena. "What's the commotion?" Finn asked a townsman as he dismounted. "Stranger on the stage asking questions about our new schoolteacher," the man replied. "Fancy Eastern fellow. Says he's her brother come to bring her important family news." Ice formed in Finn's veins. "Where is Miss Murphy now?" "At the schoolhouse, I reckon. Getting ready for tonight's adult class." Finn moved quickly through town, his mind racing. Beatrice had shared more details about her brother in recent weeks. His controlling nature, his violent outbursts, his determination to bend others to his will. If Frances Murphy had tracked her to Copper Creek, she was in immediate danger. As he approached the schoolhouse, Finn saw a well-dressed man standing on the steps, his back to the street as he peered through the window. Even from behind, the set of his shoulders suggested impatience, entitlement. "Can I help you, mister?" Finn called, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. The man turned, revealing a face that bore enough resemblance to Beatrice to confirm his identity immediately. Frances Murphy was perhaps 35, with the same green eyes as his sister, but none of her warmth. He wore an expensive suit, somewhat travel-worn, but still marking him as out of place in the frontier town. "I'm looking for Miss Beatrice Murphy," he replied, his cultured Philadelphia accent sharp against the Montana air. "I understand she teaches here." "And you are?" Finn asked, though he already knew the answer. "Dr. Frances Murphy," the man said with evident pride. "I've come to bring my sister important news from home. Family matters," he added with a dismissive gesture that suggested Finn's interest was unwelcome. Before Finn could respond, the schoolhouse door opened, revealing Beatrice with a stack of books in her arms. She froze at the sight of her brother, the color draining from her face as the books tumbled forgotten from her grasp. "Frances," she whispered, the single word laden with fear. "Beatrice," her brother acknowledged with a cold smile. "How good to finally find you after your impulsive departure. You've led me on quite a chase across the country." Finn moved immediately to Beatrice's side, positioning himself slightly in front of her. "Miss Murphy isn't interested in returning east," he stated firmly. "Whatever family matters you've come to discuss can be handled through correspondence." Frances's gaze shifted to Finn, assessing him with clinical detachment. "And you are?" "Finn Fairchild, foreman of the Rockingham Ranch." He deliberately omitted any explanation of his relationship to Beatrice, sensing that such information would only inflame the situation. "Ah, I see," Frances said with a knowing smile that chilled Finn to the bone. "My sister has always had a regrettable tendency to form inappropriate attachments. It seems Montana has not cured her of this weakness." Beatrice stepped forward, her initial shock giving way to visible anger. "What do you want, Frances? I made my position clear when I left Philadelphia." "You made nothing clear except your childish ingratitude," her brother snapped, his genial facade cracking. "I arranged an advantageous match for you, a respectable position in society, and you repaid me with theft and desertion." "Theft?" Beatrice repeated incredulously. "Mother's jewelry was left to me in her will, and the money I took wouldn't cover a tenth of what I was owed for years of unpaid work in Father's household." Frances's expression darkened. "Your place was in that household, under my guidance and protection. Instead, you've disgraced the family name by running away like a common criminal to bury yourself in this." He gestured contemptuously at the town around them. "This wasteland." "This wasteland is my home now," Beatrice replied steadily. "I have work I value, people who respect me for my abilities rather than seeing me as property to be traded in marriage." "People like this, Cowboy?" Frances sneered, his gaze flicking dismissively to Finn. "Really, Beatrice, I expected better even from you. At least Dr. Harrington was a man of education and refinement." Finn felt Beatrice tense beside him, but kept his own expression neutral, recognizing that engaging with Francis's provocations would only escalate the situation. Miss Murphy is a valued member of this community, he said evenly. Her students, both children and adults, benefit greatly from her teaching. How charming, Francis replied. Thank you, Sheriff, but that might only provoke him further, Beatrice replied. Francis is accustomed to getting his way, especially with family members. Well, you're not just family anymore, the sheriff pointed out. You're a citizen of Copper Creek, and we look after our own. That fancy Eastern doctor starts making real trouble, you let me know. When the lawman had moved on, Finn guided Beatrice into the schoolhouse, closing the door behind them. She moved to the window, watching the street with apprehensive eyes. He won't leave, she said with quiet certainty. Not without me. Then we'll deal with him, Finn assured her, joining her at the window. You're not alone in this, Beatrice. The whole town stands with you, and so do I. She turned to him, her expression troubled. You don't know Francis like I do. He's relentless, and he's clever. He'll find a way to force my compliance, whether through legal means or... She trailed off, unconsciously rubbing her wrist where the old bruises had long since faded. Finn's jaw tightened at the implication. He won't touch you, he promised. Not while I'm breathing. That's precisely what worries me, Beatrice said softly. Francis doesn't accept obstacles, he removes them. If he perceives you as standing between him and what he wants. The threat hung in the air between them, all too plausible given what she'd shared about her brother's character. Finn considered their options, weighing risks against practicalities. Come back to the ranch with me, he said suddenly. Today now? The Rockingham is 15 miles from town, far from the stage route and difficult to find without a guide. You'll be safer there until we can figure out a more permanent solution. Beatrice hesitated, glancing around the schoolroom. My students can manage a few days without lessons, Finn finished. Their safety, and yours, matters more. After a moment's reflection, she nodded. You're right. Let me gather a few things. As Beatrice quickly collected essential items, Finn kept watch at the window, relieved to see no sign of Francis Murphy on the street. They slipped out the back door of the schoolhouse, making their way to where Finn had left his horse. We'll have to ride double until we can reach the ranch and get you a mount of your own, he explained, helping her up before swinging into the saddle behind her. The closeness of their position, Beatrice seated sideways in front of him, his arms securely around her waist, would have been pleasurable under different circumstances. As they rode out of town by a back trail, Finn was acutely aware of her tension, the way she glanced repeatedly over her shoulder as if expecting her brother to materialize in pursuit. He won't find you, Finn assured her as the town disappeared behind them. And if he somehow does, he'll find more than he bargained for at the Rockingham. Beatrice leaned into his strength, her head resting briefly against his shoulder. I never wanted to bring this trouble to your door, she said quietly. To anyone's door. It's why I came so far. Trouble comes whether invited or not, Finn replied, thinking of the rustlers, the droughts, the countless other challenges frontier life had thrown at them. What matters is facing it together rather than alone. She tilted her face up to his, searchingly. When did you become so wise, Finn Fairchild? About the time a certain schoolteacher stepped off the stagecoach and turned my carefully ordered world upside down, he admitted with a small smile, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As they rode toward the Rockingham, Finn found himself planning beyond the immediate crisis. The small homestead claim he'd been quietly filing paperwork for over the past year, a parcel of land with good water and grass about 5 miles from the main ranch, suddenly took on new significance in his thoughts. It had been a solitary dream before, a place of his own where he'd imagined living out his days in splendid self-reliance. Now, with Beatrice's warm presence against him, he found himself reimagining that future. The simple cabin expanded to include a proper parlor where she might read in the evenings, shelves for her books, perhaps eventually rooms for children. The thought no longer terrified him as it once would have. Instead, it felt like the natural continuation of the journey they'd begun that day in April when their paths first crossed. But first, they had to deal with Francis Murphy, and Finn had no illusions about the challenge that presented. A man willing to cross the continent to reclaim control of his sister would not be easily discouraged. The confrontation to come would test them both in ways they could not yet imagine. News traveled quickly in ranch country. By the time Finn and Beatrice arrived at the Rockingham, Maxwell Jenkins had already heard about the Eastern doctor looking for his sister and had reached his own conclusions about the situation. "Miss Murphy's room is ready," he assured them as they dismounted in the yard. "And I've let the hands know we might have unwelcome visitors. Nobody approaches the ranch without being seen." "Thank you," Beatrice said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your home." "Nonsense," Jenkins replied firmly. "You're part of this ranch now, and we protect our own." With a meaningful glance at Finn, he added, "All our own." The implication was clear. Jenkins had observed the changing relationship between his foreman and the schoolteacher and had no objections. The knowledge warmed Finn even as concern for their immediate situation tempered his relief. "You should rest," he told Beatrice after Jenkins had gone to alert his wife about their guest. "It's been a difficult day." She nodded, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders, but her eyes remained troubled. "What happens when Francis realizes I've left town? He'll question people, and someone will eventually mention the Rockingham. By then, we'll have a better plan," Finn assured her, though his own thoughts had been running along similar lines. Francis Murphy struck him as a man whose outward civility masked dangerous determination. He would not simply give up and return east without his sister. That evening, after the children had been sent to bed, Finn, Beatrice, and the Jenkins family gathered in the main house parlor to discuss the situation. Beatrice recounted her history with her brother in more detail, her steady voice belying the difficult nature of the revelations. "So this man believes he has the right to control your life completely?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, indignation coloring her normally gentle tone. "Francis has always seen women as lesser beings," Beatrice explained. "In his view, we require constant guidance and discipline from superior male intellects like his own." Her expression hardened. "He arranged my engagement to Dr. Harrington because they shared this philosophy. Harrington was looking for a well-educated wife who could properly manage his household and assist in his practice, without compensation or recognition, of course." "No wonder you ran," Jenkins commented, shaking his head in disgust. "I had to," Beatrice said simply. "The alternative was a life sentence of submission to increasingly controlling men." She glanced at Finn. "I never expected to find happiness here. My only goal was escape." The admission touched something deep in Finn's chest. They had both been running from different pasts, he from connection after losing his parents, she from control that threatened to crush her spirit. Somehow, against all odds, they had found in each other the very thing they thought they were fleeing. "The question now is how to convince your brother to return east without you," Jenkins said practically, bringing them back to the immediate problem. "Francis doesn't accept defeat," Beatrice replied, her hands twisting together in her lap. "He'll use any means necessary, legal threats, manipulation, even force if he thinks he can get away with it." "He can try," Finn said quietly, the steel in his voice unmistakable. "But he'll find the law works differently out here than in Philadelphia drawing rooms." "That's what worries me," Beatrice admitted. "Francis is accustomed to getting his way through social pressure and legal maneuvering. If those fail him here, I fear he may resort to more direct methods." The implication hung heavy in the room. Eastern refinement notwithstanding, many men carried firearms in the West, and Francis Murphy had demonstrated a volatile temper beneath his polished exterior. "Then we make sure he never gets the opportunity," Jenkins stated firmly. "Miss Murphy stays here until her brother leaves the territory. We'll increase patrols and keep someone with her at all times when she's outside the main house." The discussion continued, practical arrangements being made for Beatrice's protection while maintaining the ranch's normal operations. Throughout, Finn remained largely silent, his thoughts moving beyond temporary measures to more permanent solutions. Later, as the household prepared for bed, he found Beatrice on the porch, gazing at the stars scattered across the vast Montana sky. She had changed into a simple house dress borrowed from Mrs. Jenkins, her honey blonde hair loose around her shoulders in a way few besides Finn had ever seen. "You're quiet tonight," she observed as he joined her at the railing. "Thinking," he replied, his eyes tracking the familiar constellations overhead. "About Francis?" "About us," Finn corrected, turning to face her. "About what happens after your brother leaves, whether forced or persuaded." Beatrice studied his face in the silvery moonlight. "What are you saying, Finn?" He took a deep breath, gathering courage for words he'd never imagined speaking to anyone. I'm saying that I love you, Beatrice Murphy. That meeting you has changed everything I thought I knew about myself and what I wanted from life. Her eyes widened, but she remained silent, waiting. I have a homestead claim, he continued. Good land. The confrontation came sooner than expected. 2 days after Beatrice's arrival at the Rockingham, a ranch hand rode in from the south boundary with news that a buggy was approaching, a conveyance rarely seen on the rough ranch roads, driven by a man matching Francis Murphy's description, with the sheriff riding alongside. He must have convinced the sheriff to bring him out here, Finn surmised grimly as they gathered on the porch to await the approaching vehicle. Probably claimed concern for your welfare. Sheriff Wilson is a good man, Jenkins said. He won't let anyone take Miss Murphy against her will, but he does believe in family reconciliation when possible. Beatrice straightened her shoulders, smoothing her borrowed dress with hands that trembled slightly despite her composed expression. I can handle Francis, she said with more confidence than Finn suspected she felt. I'm not the same frightened woman who fled Philadelphia. You're not handling him alone, Finn reminded her, his voice low and fierce. Not ever again. The buggy finally crested the rise that led to the ranch yard, dust billowing behind it as it rattled toward the main house. Francis Murphy handled the reins with evident expertise, his tailored suit incongruous against the rugged landscape. Beside him, Sheriff Wilson looked uncomfortable but determined, his weathered face suggesting he was caught in a situation not entirely to his liking. As the vehicle pulled to a stop, Finn positioned himself slightly in front of Beatrice, Jenkins at his side in a united front. The ranch hands continued their work nearby, but Finn knew they were alert to any sign of trouble, ready to intervene if necessary. Francis descended from the buggy with fluid grace, his smile pleasant, but his eyes cold as they fixed on his sister. Beatrice, he called, as if they were meeting for tea rather than after her deliberate flight. I've been concerned about your abrupt departure from town. It's fortunate the sheriff was willing to help locate you. Miss Murphy is here of her own free will, Finn stated before Beatrice could respond. And she's welcome to stay as long as she chooses. Francis's gaze shifted to him, assessment and dismissal in a single glance. Family matters should be discussed privately, Mr. Fairchild. My sister and I have much to resolve. Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of these people, Beatrice replied, stepping forward to stand beside Finn rather than behind him. They're my friends, the family I've chosen. Something ugly flashed across Francis's features before his pleasant mask slipped back into place. Very well. Our aunt is gravely ill and has asked for you specifically. As your only male relative, it's my duty to escort you back to Philadelphia. I have return tickets for tomorrow's stage. We've already established that's a lie, Beatrice said calmly. There is no sick aunt, Francis. You're here because you can't accept that I've built a life beyond your control. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the undercurrents in the exchange. Miss Murphy, he interjected. Your brother seemed genuinely concerned. Said you left Philadelphia under distressing circumstances. That you might not be thinking clearly. I left Philadelphia to escape an unwanted marriage that my brother had arranged without my consent, Beatrice explained, meeting the lawman's gaze directly, and to avoid his increasingly controlling behavior. Sheriff Wilson, I am 20 years old, of sound mind, and legally free to live where I choose. I choose Montana Territory. She's being influenced by these people, Francis broke in, his cultured voice taking on a persuasive tone. My sister was raised in refinement, educated at the finest schools. This rough existence is clearly affecting her judgment. My judgment has never been clearer, Beatrice countered. For the first time in years, I'm free to make my own choices without fear of reprisal. I have meaningful work, respect for my community, and, she glanced at Finn, a small smile touching her lips, reasons to stay that go beyond simply being away from you. Francis's expression darkened as he followed her gaze, correctly interpreting the meaning behind her words. So that's it, he said softly, dangerously. You've formed an attachment to this cowboy. Really, Beatrice, have you no sense of your own worth? Of the family name you're degrading? Mr. Fairchild is worth 10 of you, Beatrice replied, anger finally coloring her tone. He respects me as an equal, values my mind and abilities, and has never once tried to force his will upon me through manipulation or violence. Violence, the sheriff repeated sharply, his attention fully focused now. What's this about violence, Miss Murphy? Beatrice hesitated only briefly before pulling up her sleeve to reveal faint, but still visible scars around her wrist, evidence of restraints applied too tightly, too often. My brother believes in correction for women who challenge his authority, she said quietly. These are just some of the marks he's left over the years. The sheriff's expression hardened as he turned to Francis. That true, Dr. Murphy? Ridiculous, Francis scoffed, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. My sister has always been prone to dramatic exaggeration. Any marks she bears are likely self-inflicted during her more hysterical episodes. I have never been hysterical in my life, Beatrice stated with dignity. And I have witnesses in Philadelphia who can attest to my brother's treatment of me, should it become necessary to produce them. Francis's pleasant facade cracked entirely, his face contorting with barely suppressed rage. You ungrateful little. He caught himself, visibly struggling for control before turning to the sheriff. My sister is clearly confused and influenced by these frontier types. As her legal guardian, I have no legal guardian, Beatrice interrupted firmly. Father's will emancipated me fully upon his death. The family lawyer, Mr. Harrison, can confirm this. I suspect you've been counting on the distance from Philadelphia to prevent such verification. Uncertainty flickered across Francis's face, suggesting Beatrice had struck close to the truth. He recovered quickly, however, changing tactics. Even if that's the case, there's still the matter of the funds and property you took when you fled. That amounts to theft, Sheriff. Surely, even in Montana territory, that warrants arrest. I took nothing that wasn't legally mine, Beatrice countered. Mother's jewelry was left specifically to me in her will, and the money I took represents less than fair wages for the years I managed Father's household and assisted in his practice. The sheriff looked between the siblings, clearly sensing the deeper currents beneath the surface argument. Seems to me, he said slowly, that this is a matter best settled back east if there's any genuine legal dispute. Nothing here that requires Miss Murphy to leave against her wishes. Francis's control slipped further, his cultured veneer cracking to reveal the anger beneath. She is my sister, my responsibility. I will not leave her in this wilderness with these people. These people have shown me more kindness and respect in months than you have in years, Beatrice replied, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. Please, Francis, return to Philadelphia. Accept that I've chosen a different path. Never, he said flatly, his gaze moving calculatingly between Beatrice and Finn. You belong at home, under proper supervision. If you won't come willingly, there are other means. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable despite its lack of specifics. Finn moved closer to Beatrice, his protective intent clear to everyone present. That sounded mighty like a threat, Dr. Murphy, the sheriff observed, his hand shifting to rest near his holstered revolver. I don't take kindly to threats against citizens of my county. Francis seemed to realize he'd overstepped, his expression smoothing as he regained his composure. Merely an observation that family matters often resolve themselves in time, he said with forced lightness. Beatrice will eventually recognize where her duties and best interests lie. My duties and interests are here now, Beatrice stated firmly. If you truly cared for my welfare, you would respect that. A tense silence fell, Francis visibly calculating his options, while the sheriff watched him with increasing suspicion. Finally, Jenkins broke the impasse. Dr. Murphy, it's a long ride back to town, and the afternoon's getting on, he said with deceptive casualness. I suggest you return while there's still daylight. These roads can be treacherous after dark. The dismissal was clear, though phrased with frontier politeness. Francis glanced around, noting the ranch hands who had gradually moved closer during the confrontation, their expressions uniformly unwelcoming. This isn't finished, he said to Beatrice, his voice low but carrying clearly in the quiet yard. Family obligations aren't so easily abandoned. Goodbye, Francis, she replied simply, her hand finding Finn's beside her. With a final cold glance that encompassed them both, Francis Murphy turned and climbed back into the buggy. The sheriff hesitated, looking to Beatrice. You're certain you're safe here, Miss Murphy? Free to come and go as you please. Completely certain, Sheriff, she assured him. Thank you for your concern. With a nod that conveyed both acceptance and warning, the lawman mounted his own horse, prepared to escort Francis back to town. Through a window, in the middle of a rainstorm, Finn kept his revolver steady, aimed at the center of Francis's chest. Step away from the house. Now. Something dangerous flickered in Francis's eyes. A calculation, a decision made. I wonder, he said conversationally, his hand still visible but tensing subtly, how well Montana law would view a man who shoots an unarmed doctor concerned for his sister's safety. Better than it views breaking and entering, Finn replied steadily. Or attempted kidnapping, which I'm guessing was your plan. Francis's smile was cold in the darkness. Merely a family reunion, nothing more. Beatrice belongs with her own kind, not among frontier primitives. Beatrice belongs wherever she chooses, Finn corrected. And she's chosen to stay here, to build a life here. With you? Francis sneered. A common cowboy with dirt under his fingernails, and likely not a single volume of literature to his name? You can't possibly imagine yourself worthy of a Murphy. I don't imagine myself worthy of Beatrice, Finn admitted honestly. But for some reason, she believes I am, and I aim to spend my life trying to deserve that belief. Francis's expression contorted with disgust. Sentimental drivel. My sister requires guidance, structure, not romantic nonsense from some saddle-sore ranch hand. Your sister requires respect, Finn countered, something you've never shown her. Respect, Francis repeated incredulously. For a woman? Women are like children, emotionally driven, intellectually limited. They require a firm hand, not deference to their foolish whims. The naked contempt in his voice confirmed everything Beatrice had revealed about her brother's character. This was a man who viewed women not as equals, but as possessions, beings to be controlled rather than loved. The realization hardened Finn's resolve. Move away from the house, he ordered again, gesturing with the revolver. You're leaving the Rockingham tonight, and you're not coming back. Francis's hand moved suddenly, reaching inside his rain-soaked jacket. Finn tensed, ready to fire if a weapon appeared, but instead Francis withdrew a folded document. I have a court order, he announced triumphantly, holding up the water-spotted paper. Signed by Judge Maxwell and Helena yesterday. It declares my sister mentally incompetent and places her under my guardianship. That's impossible, Finn said, though doubt crept into his voice. Beatrice is of sound mind, and her fathers will emancipate her. Judge Maxwell was persuaded otherwise, Francis replied with evident satisfaction, particularly when presented with evidence of Beatrice's erratic behavior, fleeing her home, abandoning an advantageous engagement, taking up with unsuitable companions in the wilderness. His gaze flicked meaningfully to Finn. The good judge agreed that such actions suggest mental instability requiring intervention. The document, even if fraudulent or obtained through manipulation, presented a new threat. Montana Territory's legal system was still developing, with considerable deference given to Eastern courts and established family structures. If Francis had indeed secured such an order, it could create legal complications that would be difficult to navigate. Before Finn could respond, the front door of the house opened, spilling light into the rain-soaked yard. Beatrice stood framed in the doorway, her expression shifting from concern to shock as she recognized her brother. Francis, she gasped. What are you doing here? Reclaiming my wayward sister, he replied smoothly, turning toward her with renewed confidence. I have the legal authority now, Beatrice. Judge Maxwell has declared you incompetent and placed you under my guardianship. We leave for Philadelphia immediately. Beatrice paled but stood her ground. I don't believe you, she said, though her voice wavered slightly. No judge would make such a ruling without speaking to me directly. Judges make such rulings every day, Francis countered, stepping toward her with the paper extended. When presented with evidence of a woman's hysteria and poor judgment, they naturally defer to male family members' assessment. Finn moved to intercept him, positioning himself between Francis and Beatrice. That paper changes nothing, he stated firmly. If you want to enforce it, you'll need to bring the sheriff and explain to him why you were trying to break into the house tonight, instead of presenting your court order properly. Francis's expression darkened. This delay is pointless. The law is clear. The law also requires due process, Beatrice interrupted, her initial shock giving way to renewed determination. Even if you've somehow manipulated a judge into signing that document, I have the right to contest it, to present evidence of my sound mind and your inappropriate behavior. Evidence such as those convenient scars you displayed earlier? Francis sneered. Easily explained as self-inflicted during episodes of hysteria. Your history of emotional instability is well documented in Philadelphia. By you, Beatrice pointed out. The same man who stands to control my inheritance if I'm declared incompetent. The accusation hung in the rain-soaked air between them. For a moment, Francis seemed genuinely startled, as if he hadn't expected Beatrice to make the connection. This isn't about money, he insisted, though his eyes shifted away from her direct gaze. It's about family responsibility, about protecting you from your own poor decisions. Decisions like refusing to marry a man who shares your belief that women are property, Beatrice challenged. Or perhaps decisions like using my medical knowledge to help others instead of serving as your unpaid assistant and housekeeper? By now, the commotion had drawn others from the bunkhouse and main house. Jenkins appeared with a shotgun, taking in the scene with a quick glance before training the weapon on Francis. Appears we have an uninvited visitor, he observed mildly, though the shotgun remained rock-steady. One who seems to have difficulty understanding when he's not welcome. Francis looked around, suddenly aware of his vulnerable position. The ranch hands forming a loose circle, Jenkins with his shotgun, Finn's unwavering revolver, all made clear that his legal document, whatever its validity, would not be enforced tonight. This isn't over, he said finally, his cold gaze fixing on Beatrice. I'll return with the sheriff and proper authorities. You can't hide behind these people forever. She's not hiding, Finn replied steadily. She's home. The simple declaration seemed to infuriate Francis more than any threat could have. With a final venomous glance that encompassed them both, he turned and stalked toward the road, his dignity somewhat undermined by his sodden appearance and the mud clinging to his once fine shoes. Jenkins dispatched 2 ranch hands to ensure Francis actually left the property, then turned to Beatrice with concern. You all right, Miss Murphy? Yes, she replied, though her hands trembled slightly as she pushed a strand of hair from her face. Just shaken. I never thought he would go this far. That paper he was waving, could it be genuine? Finn asked quietly as they moved inside, out of the rain. Beatrice considered the question, her practical mind asserting itself despite the emotional turmoil. Possibly. Francis has connections, and he can be persuasive when he wants to be. A judge who doesn't know me, presented with a carefully crafted story about a mentally unstable young woman who fled her family. She shrugged. It's not impossible. Then we need to fight it properly, Finn said decisively. First thing tomorrow, we ride to Helena to see this Judge Maxwell ourselves. Present your side of the story. Jenkins nodded agreement. Take my best horses. You can make Helena by tomorrow evening if you push hard. And if Francis follows? Beatrice asked, her practical concern cutting to the heart of the matter. He won't get near you, Finn promised, his voice leaving no room for doubt. Not again. Later, when plans had been made and the household had returned to uneasy sleep, Finn found Beatrice in the kitchen, staring into a cup of tea gone cold in her hands. You should rest, he said gently, sitting beside her at the rough wooden table. Tomorrow will be a long day. I keep thinking about what he said, she replied, not looking up from her cup. About judges deferring to male family members' assessment of a woman's mental state. It happens, Finn, more often than you might imagine. Women declared hysterical or incompetent for behavior that simply inconveniences the men in their lives. Finn reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. This is Montana territory, not Philadelphia society. Folks out here judge people on what they do, not who their family is or what some Eastern doctor claims. You've earned respect in Copper Creek and at the Rockingham through your own actions. I hope that's enough, she said softly. Because if it isn't, if this court order is upheld, Francis will take me back to Philadelphia and ensure I never escape again. The fear in her voice stirred a protective fury in Finn's chest. That won't happen, he promised. If legal means fail, there are alternatives. She looked up, finally meeting his eyes. What alternatives? Marriage, he said simply. Even if Francis has somehow secured temporary guardianship, a husband's rights would supersede a brother's in most courts. If we marry before any ruling is enforced. You would do that? She asked, searching his face. Move our plans forward. Marry me now, even knowing it might mean legal battles with Francis? I would marry you tonight if it would keep you safe, Finn replied. Possibly, Simmons allowed. Or it could be a different type of order altogether, perhaps a temporary measure pending a full hearing. Your brother may have exaggerated its scope to intimidate Miss Murphy. That would be consistent with Francis's methods, Beatrice observed grimly. He's always relied on intimidation and misinformation to control situations. Well, there's a simple way to determine the truth, Simmons said, rising from his chair with surprising agility for a man his age. We'll call on Judge Maxwell first thing tomorrow morning and inquire directly about any orders involving Miss Beatrice Murphy. And if such an order exists? Finn asked, the question that had been weighing on them both. Then we fight it, Simmons replied firmly. With evidence of Miss Murphy's clear competence, her established position in the community, and the concerning behavior of the brother who seeks control over her. Montana Territory may be young, but our courts are not blind to manipulation. The lawyer's confidence reassured them somewhat, though Beatrice remained troubled as they walked back to their hotel through Helena's bustling evening streets. What if Francis arrives before we can see the judge? She asked quietly. He could be on his way to Helena already, perhaps with the sheriff in tow. Then we implement our alternative plan, Finn replied, his voice equally low. I've already inquired about the procedure for obtaining a marriage license here in Helena. We could have one by noon tomorrow if necessary. Beatrice nodded, her expression resolute despite the worry in her eyes. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Not because I don't want to marry you, she added quickly, but because I want our wedding to be a beginning, not merely a defense against Francis. It will be a beginning regardless, Finn assured her, briefly taking her hand as they paused at a street corner. Whatever brings us to that moment, the life we build afterward will be ours alone. Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination as they made their way to the territorial courthouse, a substantial structure that reflected Helena's growing importance. Judge Maxwell's clerk informed them that the judge would see them at 10 o'clock, giving them an anxious hour to wait in the wood-paneled anteroom. Remember, Simmons advised as they finally entered the judge's chambers, speak clearly and directly. Judge Maxwell appreciates forthrightness. The judge himself, an imposing man with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, looked up from his papers as they were announced. Mr. Simmons, he acknowledged with a nod. What brings you before me today? Your Honor, I represent Miss Beatrice Murphy, Simmons began, gesturing to Beatrice. We've come to inquire about a court order that allegedly declares her mentally incompetent and places her under the guardianship of her brother, Dr. Francis Murphy. Miss Murphy has not been notified of any such proceedings, yet her brother claims to have secured this order from your court. Judge Maxwell's expression sharpened with interest as he studied Beatrice. Miss Murphy, he said directly, I have indeed been approached by a Dr. Francis Murphy regarding his sister's mental state. He presented affidavits from Philadelphia physicians attesting to episodes of hysteria and erratic behavior, culminating in your departure from your family home. Beatrice's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. And did you grant his request for guardianship, Your Honor? I did not, the judge replied firmly. I issued only a temporary order requiring you to appear before this court for assessment before any determination of competence could be made. Certainly nothing granting your brother immediate custody or control. Relief washed through both Beatrice and Finn, though they maintained careful decorum in the judge's presence. May I ask when this hearing is scheduled to take place? Simmons inquired. Next Tuesday, Judge Maxwell replied, consulting his calendar. Though now that Miss Murphy has presented herself voluntarily, I see no reason why we couldn't proceed today if my afternoon docket permits. He studied Beatrice thoughtfully. I must say, young lady, you appear remarkably composed for someone allegedly suffering from hysteria and mental instability. That's because I suffer from neither, Your Honor, Beatrice replied steadily. My brother's claims are motivated by his desire to control my inheritance and to punish me for refusing an unwanted marriage he had arranged. The judge's eyebrows rose. Serious allegations. Are you prepared to provide evidence of these claims? I am, Beatrice confirmed, including documentation of my father's will that emancipated me upon his death, and witnesses from Copper Creek who can attest to my sound mind and character since arriving in Montana Territory. Judge Maxwell nodded, making a note on his desk calendar. Return at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I'll hear preliminary testimony from you and review any documentation you have. Your brother will be notified of the proceeding, of course, as the petitioner in this matter. Your Honor, Finn spoke for the first time, stepping forward slightly. Dr. Murphy has already attempted to forcibly remove Miss Murphy from her residence at the Rockingham Ranch. If he's notified of her presence in Helena. I understand your concern, Mr. Fairchild, Your Honor. Foreman of the Rockingham Ranch. Mr. Fairchild, the judge acknowledged. Rest assured that these proceedings will be conducted with proper order. If Dr. Murphy attempts any inappropriate action, he will find himself in contempt of this court, a position I doubt a man of his professional standing wishes to occupy. With that assurance, they were dismissed until the afternoon hearing. As they left the courthouse, Simmons appeared cautiously optimistic. Judge Maxwell is fair-minded and not easily swayed by social position or Eastern credentials, he told them. That he's willing to hear your case immediately is a positive sign. But Francis will be notified, Beatrice pointed out, concern evident in her voice. He could be in Helena by this afternoon. All the more reason to present your case clearly and compellingly, Simmons replied. We have several hours to prepare. Let's use them wisely. The afternoon hearing began promptly at 2, with Beatrice taking the stand to testify about her relationship with her brother, the circumstances of her departure from Philadelphia, and her subsequent establishment in Montana Territory. She spoke with quiet dignity, her education and intelligence evident in her articulate responses to the judge's questions. And you believe your brother's petition is motivated not by genuine concern for your welfare, but by financial and personal control? Judge Maxwell clarified. Yes, Your Honor, Beatrice replied. Upon my father's death, I inherited a portion of his estate independently. If I'm declared incompetent, Francis would gain control of those assets as my guardian. Additionally, he arranged my marriage to his colleague, Dr. Harrington, without my consent, an arrangement that would have benefited both men professionally while reducing me to essentially household staff. The judge nodded thoughtfully. You're currently employed as a teacher in Copper Creek, I understand? Yes, Your Honor. I teach both children and adults, including reading classes for minors and ranch hands who never had formal education. A commendable service, Maxwell observed. Hardly the occupation of someone incapable of managing their own affairs. As Beatrice completed her testimony, the courtroom door opened to admit Francis Murphy, accompanied by a well-dressed man who was clearly a lawyer. Francis's eyes narrowed at the sight of his sister on the witness stand, but he maintained his composure as he took a seat. Judge Maxwell acknowledged the newcomers with a brief nod. Dr. Murphy, you're just in time. Your sister has been providing testimony regarding your petition. We'll hear from you shortly. Finn followed Francis's movements with watchful attention, noting the controlled anger in his rigid posture and the calculating assessment as he observed the proceedings. When Beatrice returned to her seat, Francis's gaze followed her, cold and assessing. The hearing continued with testimony from Finn regarding Beatrice's character and contributions at the Rockingham, followed by presentation of letters from Jenkins and the Copper Creek School Board attesting to her competence and value to the community. Throughout, Francis sat in tightly leashed silence, occasionally whispering to his lawyer. When it was finally Francis's turn to speak, he approached the stand with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to professional respect. He spoke eloquently about his unfortunate sister's condition, describing alleged episodes of instability dating back to their mother's death, culminating in what he termed her irrational flight from Philadelphia. Your Honor, I have only my sister's welfare at heart, he concluded with practiced sincerity. Her actions, abandoning a respectable position, fleeing across the country, taking up residence among frontier elements, all suggest a mind not fully capable of rational decision-making. I seek guardianship not to control her, but to protect her from her own poor judgment. Judge Maxwell listened impassively, then asked, And what would you intend for your sister should guardianship be granted? Return to Philadelphia, naturally, Francis replied without hesitation, where she can receive proper medical attention from specialists familiar with female nervous conditions. With appropriate treatment and supervision, she might eventually recover sufficiently to enjoy some measure of independence, though marriage would likely be inadvisable given her fragility. The calculated cruelty of the statement, positioning Beatrice as permanently damaged, requiring lifelong control, was evident to everyone in the court. Beatrice glanced over her shoulder at the courthouse doors, where Francis and his lawyer had just emerged, deep in conversation. Yes, she decided. But first, she reached for Finn's hand, tugging him down the steps and away from her brother's notice. There's something I want to do while we're in Helena. Curiosity piqued, Finn allowed her to lead him through several streets until they reached a small church set back from the main thoroughfare. Its white-painted exterior gleamed in the afternoon sun, and beds of late summer flowers lined the walkway to its door. Beatrice, Finn questioned, realization dawning as she pulled him toward the entrance. I said I wanted our wedding to be a beginning, not merely a defense against Francis, she explained, her green eyes bright with determination. The court has protected my legal independence, but my heart made its choice weeks ago. Unless you've reconsidered? In answer, Finn drew her close, his kiss conveying everything words couldn't express. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I have never been more certain of anything in my life, he assured her. But what about your dream of a proper wedding at the Rocking M, with the children participating and Mrs. Jenkins helping with your dress? Beatrice smiled, her fingers lightly tracing the line of his jaw. Dreams can change. Being with you, starting our life together without delay, that's what matters now. Her expression grew more serious. And if I'm honest, I won't feel truly safe from Francis until we're legally bound. A husband's rights supersede a brother's, even in the most traditional courts. Understanding her lingering fear, Finn nodded. Then let's see if the Reverend is available. He was, as it happened, a kindly older man who listened to their abbreviated story with sympathetic attention before agreeing to perform the ceremony. 2 church ladies were summoned as witnesses, and within the hour, Finn found himself standing before the altar with Beatrice's hand in his, exchanging vows that transformed them from foreman and schoolteacher to husband and wife. I, Beatrice Murphy, take thee, Finn Fairchild, to be my wedded husband, she said clearly, her eyes never leaving his. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. As Finn repeated the same vows, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him, he marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From his initial wariness when she stepped off the stagecoach to this profound certainty that his life would never be complete without her. The simple gold bands they exchanged had been purchased hastily from a jeweler near the church, but as Finn slid the ring onto Beatrice's finger, it seemed as significant and binding as any elaborately planned ceremony could have been. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the Reverend declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Their first kiss as a married couple was tender but brief, both aware of the witnesses and the Reverend's presence. The real celebration, they silently agreed, would come later when they were truly alone. After signing the marriage certificate and thanking the Reverend and witnesses, they emerged into the late afternoon sunlight as Mr. and Mrs. Fairchild, a transformation that felt momentous yet somehow perfectly natural, as if they had always been destined for this union. We should find a telegraph office, Finn suggested as they walked hand in hand through Helena's streets. Let Jenkins know about the court ruling and our change in status. Beatrice agreed, though her attention was divided, her gaze occasionally scanning their surroundings with lingering wariness. Do you think Francis has left Helena? She asked quietly. I doubt it, Finn replied honestly. He doesn't strike me as a man who accepts defeat easily. No, she acknowledged grimly. He doesn't. Their caution proved warranted. As they rounded a corner near the telegraph office, Francis stepped out from a shop doorway, blocking their path. His composed facade had crumbled, revealing the anger that had clearly been building since the judge's ruling. Running away again, Beatrice? He asked coldly, his gaze flicking to their clasped hands, and the new gold band visible on her finger. His eyes narrowed as understanding dawned. Ah, I see. You've found yet another way to disgrace our family name. My name is Fairchild now, Beatrice replied steadily. And you no longer have any claim on my decisions, Francis. The judge made that clear. Francis's laugh held no humor. A territorial judge's ruling means nothing in Philadelphia society. You've abandoned everything: position, reputation, family legacy. For what? A squalid existence on some dusty ranch with this cowboy? For love, Beatrice corrected him. For respect. For the freedom to use my mind and abilities as I choose. All things you would never have permitted. Love, Francis repeated derisively. A convenient fiction women use to justify their worst impulses. His gaze shifted to Finn, contempt evident. And you, Mr. Fairchild, what do you gain from this hasty union? My sister's modest inheritance, perhaps? Or merely the satisfaction of possessing something that once belonged to your betters? Finn's hand tightened on Beatrice's, but he kept his voice level. I gain a partner, Dr. Murphy. An equal. Something you've clearly never understood the value of. Francis's expression darkened further. Equal? Women aren't men's equals. They're weaker vessels, designed for submission and service. My sister will learn that lesson eventually, whether in Philadelphia under proper supervision or here in this wilderness, when you tire of pretending she's your equal. You're wrong, Finn said simply. About women, about Beatrice, about everything that matters. And I'm thankful every day that she had the courage to escape your twisted view of the world. For a moment, it seemed Francis might physically lash out, his control slipping as his hands clenched at his sides. But even in his anger, he retained enough awareness of their public setting to restrain himself. This isn't finished, he said instead, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You may have won this skirmish, but the war continues. Beatrice belongs in Philadelphia, under appropriate guidance. One way or another, I'll see her return there. Goodbye, Francis, Beatrice said firmly, stepping around him with Finn at her side. I hope someday you find peace with my choices, but whether you do or not, they remain my choices to make. As they walked away, Finn could feel Francis's gaze burning into their backs, but he didn't turn. His focus remained on Beatrice, his wife, and the future they would build together, far from the control her brother represented. That night, in the privacy of their hotel room, now shared as husband and wife, Finn held Beatrice close, her honey blonde hair spilling across his chest as they whispered plans for their homestead, for the life they would create together at the edge of the rocking M. Do you think he'll truly give up? Beatrice asked softly, the question that had lingered between them all evening finally voiced. I don't know, Finn admitted honestly. But I do know that whatever comes, we'll face it together. You're not alone anymore, Beatrice. Not ever again. She raised her head to look at him, moonlight from the window silvering her features. I never imagined, when I stepped off that stagecoach in Copper Creek, that I would find not just safety but love. That the quiet cowboy watching from across the street would become my husband, my protector, my future. And I never imagined that the Eastern schoolteacher with the determined chin and intelligent eyes would break through every wall I'd built around my heart. Finn replied, his fingers gently tracing the curve of her cheek. Yet here we are, Mrs. Fairchild. The name, her new name, brought a smile to her lips. Mrs. Fairchild, she repeated softly. I like the sound of that. Their kiss deepened, tender exploration giving way to passionate certainty as they celebrated their union in the most intimate way possible, affirming with touch what they had promised in words. For this night at least, Francis Murphy and his threats seemed distant, unable to penetrate the sanctuary they had created in each other's arms. The journey back to the Rocking M took 2 days, the newlyweds traveling at a more leisurely pace than their urgent ride to Helena had allowed. They arrived to find the ranch in full harvest preparations, the autumn work of cutting hay and preparing for winter well underway. Jenkins met them in the yard, his weathered face splitting into a broad grin as Finn explained the outcome of their Helena adventure, both the court ruling and their subsequent marriage. Well now, the ranch owner said, clasping Finn's shoulder warmly. I can't say I'm surprised about the wedding, though the timing's a bit sooner than expected. Mrs. Jenkins will be disappointed to have missed the ceremony. We plan to have a celebration here at the ranch, Beatrice explained. A chance for everyone to share in our happiness, even if the legal formalities have already been addressed. A fine idea, Jenkins approved. And what of your brother? The judge put him firmly in his place, I hope. Finn's expression sobered. The judge ruled completely in Beatrice's favor, but Francis, he made threats before we left Helena. Implied he wasn't finished trying to force her return to Philadelphia. Jenkins frowned. Man doesn't know when he's beaten, does he? Francis has never accepted defeat in his life, Beatrice said quietly. It's not in his nature. Well, he'll find slim pickings if he tries anything here, Jenkins assured them.